this story has not gotten enough attention, I think. I hope it just doesn't go away forever. And that's all that buzz and the headlines about Sinclair News. Now, here's how it started. It started because of that great montage, and we played it for you last week, that Deadspin put together of anchors on Sinclair stations across the country, all basically at the same time on cue, saying the same words, warning about fake news on social media and warning that some people in the media are using their platform to push their own political agenda, which, by the way, is exactly what Sinclair News is doing. So I really dug into this, getting ready for this Fox News broadcast. And let me tell you, it is a lot worse than I thought. First of all, Sinclair, it's like move over Fox News, because the biggest media embarrassment and the biggest right-wing media force today may not be Fox News. It may be Sinclair Broadcast Group. Sinclair Broadcast Group own 193 stations in this country. 193 stations. They are the biggest TV broadcaster in the country today. Now, here's the problem. You don't know a Sinclair station from any other station. If you tune into CNN, you know you're watching CNN. You tune into NBC, you know you're watching NBC. But you tune into your local television channel, and you may think you're watching WJLA in Washington, D.C. No, you're not. Well, you are, but you're watching a Sinclair station. But there's nothing that says, welcome to Sinclair, or this is the Sinclair Broadcast Group. So they're like these stealth broadcasters. And what are they doing? They are the Trump machine. They're an extremely conservative group, ownership. President's a guy named David Smith. I'll tell you more about him later. In 2016, they put out an order to their TV stations to run more positive stories about candidate Donald Trump.
By the way, I just want to remind you, it was in 2016, December of 2016, that Jared Kushner said that the Trump campaign or the Trump administration had put together a deal with Sinclair to give them fairer coverage. And that interview that you talk about was sort of the highlight of it, because they gave more access to Donald Trump to Sinclair stations. And the agreement was they would put the interview out without editing, without commentary, without anything.
Yeah. So what they do to their stations is they give them stuff they're called must run. So we own you. People think you're just a local station. But what you're seeing is stuff that is put together by the propagandists at the company, at the headquarters, and sent out to these stations as must run. Today they're doing that with commentaries by Boris Epshteyn. Remember, he was in the Trump campaign and the Trump White House for a little while. He's nothing but this Trump propagandist out there. So he does a commentary, and then these local stations have to run it. It's like they had to run this message that they sent out to these anchors. And not only that, Peter, as you pointed out last week, if these anchors refuse to do it, right, what happens? Well, if they quit before their contract is up, they have to repay 40% of the compensation that they received from Sinclair Broadcasting. So a lot of these people, they may not want to do it, and there have been a lot of grumbling about it by some, but they do it because they'd have to pay basically half of the money they've got in salary from Sinclair for years back to the company.
Yeah. I mean,
just outrageous.
And like
it really is indentured servitude.
Over the years, what we've seen happen with media in general, right? TV is really bad about this, especially on the local level. If you're an anchor, everybody thinks that that's sort of like a glamorous job. Like they're paying these people very, very little money these
relatively,
days.
yeah,
relatively speaking,
right,
of course.
Right.
But they're not getting paid a lot of money. So if you're looking at, I have to read this script versus I have to quit and then pay all this money back, you probably can't pay that money back.
No, yeah, I mean, if you had a mortgage or you have a family,
you're screwed.
Exactly.
You can't pay that money back.
No. So I got to tell you, I figured it out. I have worked for 5 channels, right? in my career so far, right? I have never been asked to read, or never been told I had to read something, or never been asked to read something, never been asked to express any point of view. If I were, I wouldn't do it. I mean, I would quit. I just wouldn't do it. But I can understand why some of these people can't do it. And if you care about democracy, if you care about free and independent media, you got to be troubled by what Sinclair is doing. Now, and I had a firsthand look at this in Chicago when I went out to the great WGN in Chicago. WGN, people love GN, conservative or liberal. They love WGN in Chicago, WGN TV, because it's Chicago's own, and it's known as Chicago's own. A great guy there by the name of Paul Lisnek interviewed me about my new book, From the Left. But I got to tell you, in talking with Paul and with other people around the station, they're concerned because WGN is one of the stations, big stations that Sinclair now is out to buy. And that's what this thing is going to get a lot worse, because Sinclair, I already mentioned, 193 stations, right? That they are looking now, seeking permission to buy another 42 stations. If they get those 42 stations from the FCC, that will give them coverage in 72% of American households. 7 out of 10 households in the United States will be served by a Sinclair television station. Now, think about that 72. The current FCC rules say you cannot have coverage in more than 39% of American households. They would go from 39% to 72%. And you're going to say, oh, the FCC would never allow them to do that. Oh, no? Guess who Sinclair Broadcast Group's best buddies are? Guess who went out to defend them last week by Twitter? Of course, President Donald Trump. They support him. He supports them. They order their stations to run more positive stories about Donald Trump. They give him better coverage. They put Boris Epstein on their payroll. And Donald Trump appoints a guy, Ajit Pai, the new head of the FCC, whose total agenda is, he has said, less regulation, deregulation. Let's take the limits off of how many stations any one company can own. And I'll bet you that Sinclair Broadcast Group under the Trump administration is going to get that go-ahead, which will enable them again to get into 72% of American households. So it's only this whole propaganda campaign is only going to get worse. And this is the company that we ought to be really watching, Sinclair Broadcast Group. And their president, I promised more about him, their president, David Smith, he just gave an interview, not an interview, but a telephone conversation with New York Magazine, where David Smith said that print media, he said, quote, serves no real purpose at all. That with print media, he said, facts and truth have been lost for a long time and are likely never to return. But basically he's saying there's nothing in print that's worthwhile at all.
God.
I wonder, which I asked yesterday on Fox News, whether that includes the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Examiner, the Washington Times, the Weekly Standard, the New Review. We could mention a lot of other conservative print publications.
But you know, the thing about those conservative print publications you just mentioned, a lot of them pride themselves on being sort of anti-Trump, but still on board with the conservative agenda. So, like, it really is personal.
Yeah, right. But
it's not for the good of the conservative movement. It's for the good of Donald Trump and no one else.
Yeah, but for him to say that, right, just shows basically his ignorance. Yeah. And this is David Smith, the same David Smith, by the way, who before he took over this company, Sinclair Broadcast Group, was founded by his father. Before he took over this company, David Smith job, he was head of an outfit called Cine Processors.
That sounds legit.
Cine Processors, yeah. It was legit. It was a legit porn operation. Their business was bootlegging porn movies. The first one they did was Deep Throat. They took, I wouldn't call them legitimate, but major studio porn movies, whatever. And they made bootleg copies of them and distributed them to outlets, these little stores where you can go in, a little booth, and watch the dirty movies. That was his business. This is David Smith. David Smith, who was also arrested at one time for having sex with a prostitute in his car, I believe, up in Baltimore. So I guess at least when he and Donald Trump get together, they have something more to talk about than the media.
Yeah, fair. Fair.
Birds of a feather.
I mean, former porn guy, and yet that job is less sleazy than what he's doing with Donald Trump right now. That's awful.
Yeah. Anyhow, watch out for Sinclair Broadcast Group.